participating in this important hearing. I also want to recognize our state senator who is here, Bruce Tarr, our state representative, Ann Margaret Ferranti. We also have representatives here from Senator Kerry's office and Senator Scott Brown's office as well. And a special thank you and welcome to former Mayor John Bell, who is with us as well. I want to just sort of give you a sense of where you are. And you are in Gloucester, which is America's oldest fishing port in the nation. And for 400 years, we've supplied a hungry nation with fresh, wholesome fish. Gloucester is the #1 ground fish port in New England, and we are 10th in the nation in fish landings. In addition, we are the port infrastructure for the vast majority of the Gulf of Maine. Before you leave here today, I would ask you to just venture up to our 3rd floor to observe and remember the 5,000 names of Gloucester fishermen who have gone down to the sea in ships. Their names are listed on the walls of our city hall and in our memory. I especially want to thank Congressman Tierney. Gloucester is brilliant, and it is through your efforts and the efforts of so many others that Gloucester will continue to fish for another 400 years. Thank you.
Domestic Policy Subcommittee of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee will now come to order. I'm Congressman Dennis Kucinich, Chairman of the Subcommittee, and I'm here with Congressman Tierney and Congressman Frank. Congressman Tierney asked me a few weeks ago if I would come to Gloucester, and I'm happy to be here. I've had a deep and abiding interest in New England, and of course, coming from Cleveland, where we have an active fishing industry in Lake Erie. I understand the importance of this industry to your state and to the nation. The purpose of this field is to examine problems in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Office for Law Enforcement, identified by the Department of Commerce Office of Inspector General, and to hear NOAA's agency response to those findings. Now, without objection, the chair and other members will have 2 minutes to make opening statements, followed by opening statements not to exceed 2 minutes by any other member who may join us. And without objection, members and witnesses will have 5 legislative days to submit a written statement or extraneous materials for the record. Today's field hearing of the Domestic Policy Subcommittee of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee concerns serious and persistent problems in fishery law enforcement in the Northeast region. Gloucester fishermen have, for years, felt that they were being treated as criminals by the Office for Law Enforcement of the National Marine Fisheries Service. They felt that the fines they paid were unfairly harsh, and they felt a deep mistrust of federal law enforcement officials. They were right. This January, at the request of NOAA's administrator, Dr. James Luchenko, responding to the request of my colleague, Congressman Tierney and others, the Inspector General for the Department of Commerce issued a scathing report, which found, among other things, NOAA management, concerned primarily with managing a science-based agency, does not exercise adequate leadership or oversight over the fishery law enforcement elements of its mission. By virtue of staffing and practices, Office of Law Enforcement, it's the OLE, conducts itself as a criminal investigation unit, which is at variance with the primary statute that enforces and blurs the distinction between regulatory enforcement matters and criminal investigation. Compared to other federal natural resource law enforcement agencies, OLE's emphasis on employing criminal investigative techniques and personnel to regulatory enforcement matters is aberrant. The Inspector General found that penalties assessed in the Northeast region are comparatively harsh. The Inspector General also discovered that NOAA management does not apply customary internal controls and auditing practices to the Civil Asset Forfeiture Fund. As a result, the Office of the Inspector General could not draw any conclusions about how those funds were managed, and it commissioned a forensic audit of the fund, which will be published later in March. Lastly, the Inspector General is continuing its investigation with respect to allegations of abusive or arbitrary enforcement practices in certain individual cases. Dr. Luchenko responded to the IG's findings with an extensive list of immediate and longer-term actions. Later this month, the recently appointed General Counsel for NOAA will issue her plan for comprehensive reform at the troubled agency. Clearly, profound changes will have to be made to correct the problems identified by the Inspector General. Those problems originated with OLE and NOAA top management. They've been festering a long time. New top management at NOAA offers a chance at reform, and we felt we had to hear from Dr. Luchenko herself about the direction she's charting. We also felt it was important that the Chief of the Office of Law Enforcement testify and answer questions about his leadership. Judging by the comments that we've seen from fishermen and OLE employees alike, Mr. Jones has much explaining to do and bears much of the responsibility for the problems at OLE identified by the Inspector General. I also want to note that today's hearing and this subcommittee's engagement in this issue is due to the advocacy of Congressman Tierney, and I thank him for his advocacy and also for the urgency that he expressed in bringing this matter forward. At this time, the Chair will recognize Mr. Tierney for his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the Mayor, particularly for her opening remarks and welcoming us here, as well as the other elected leadership that are here, Senator Tarr, Representative Ferrante, former Mayor John Bell, and so much of the leadership of the fishing community and the business and citizenry of this area, this community, takes this as a very serious matter. I'm particularly pleased to be joined by my colleague Barney Frank, who's been a leader on this issue for many, many years, and I want to thank the Chairman for holding the hearing and holding what I believe is the first congressional hearing on the issues raised in the Inspector General's report, which is entitled Review of NOAA Fisheries Enforcement Programs and Operations. And I want to thank you for convening it in Gloucester. I know it was at some inconvenience to you and others, but as Mayor Kirk indicated in her opening remarks, and as those in the audience know well, it's only appropriate that the hearing take place right here in Gloucester, which has been a renowned fishing community since its founding in 1623. We're very proud of that. Generations of local residents have earned a living and provided for their families with their catches from the sea. And last week we had the opportunity in Washington to meet with a number of fishermen and their families who visited as part of the United We Fish rally. I think that was an excellent gathering of people that really focused on this issue. During that meeting, I had occasion to talk with a young teenager who was accompanying his mother. And he told me about the kinds of fish his mom and dad were catching, the challenges they were facing, and how he sometimes went out to sea with them. He knew what he was talking about, he was knowledgeable, and he spoke with pride. But the little anecdote evidences that what's true in so many cases, that the fishing is a family business in the city and in the Northeast. One of the reasons we advocated for this hearing to occur here in Gloucester, Mr. Chairman, was so that you and the other Washington-based agency officials can come to the city and see and listen to what the fishing industry means to its residents. I'm happy that Administrator Lubchenco finally made the opportunity this morning to meet with Representative Bruce from the Gloucester fishing community. I know it was an inconvenience for her, and I know that it took some pressing to get you to come here, Doctor, and same with Mr. Jones, but we think it's valuable that you be here. And we're glad that you showed up and took the advantage of getting here a little early this morning to speak directly with some of the folks. Let me also say that this family business is a very big deal. Of all the New England states, the commercial fishing industry had one of the highest sales, income, and employment impacts in Massachusetts, according to data published by NOAA. But the fishing community in Gloucester and elsewhere in Massachusetts continues to confront frequent hurdles and significant hardships. They have been increasingly burdened with complex and seemingly unrealistic regulations, limiting their access and restricting their days at sea. The Magnuson-Stevens Act should be amended to provide more flexibility. We acknowledge Representative Frank Mallone's legislation, and many of us co-sponsor that, and we acknowledge his leadership as well. On top of this, my colleagues and I have been hearing now from local fishermen about how they've been subjected to unfair treatment, cited for seemingly arbitrary violations, and charged exorbitant fines. That's why we asked the administrator to investigate, and that's why she asked the Inspector General for a report. The stories have been told for many years past. They were told in Washington at the rally, and they were told this morning, I'm sure, to the administrator. The Inspector General's report just confirmed this. It noted that there are systemic nationwide issues with NOAA's law enforcement programs, practices, and personnel. Among other things, this report cited NOAA's Office of General Counsel for Enforcement and Litigation. The data that for the days between July 2004 and June 2009 showed that in the Northeast region, the initial fine assessments totaled nearly $5.5 million. That's 2.5 times greater than the second highest region, and 5 times or more than the other 4 regions. Additionally, the data shows the Northeast is the region with the greatest percentage reduction from assessed to settled fine amounts, approximately $5.5 million assessed to approximately $1.6 million settled, which is about a 70% reduction. There is a lack of oversight and enforcement by NOAA. Questions of fairness and consistency abound. The program integrity and accountability are in question, and at the very least, an appearance of abuse of authority exists. A further concern is that NOAA currently retains the proceeds from these excessive penalties. It's very troublesome that there is inadequate auditing of this money, which is deposited in an asset forfeiture fund. By the Inspector General's count, there was $8.4 million in this fund at the end of 2009. We should question whether allowing the agency to keep those collected penalties provides some sort of perverse incentive for officials to levy excessive fines. Today's hearing offers us the opportunity to hear from 3 key senior officials: Dr. Lubchenco, the Administrator of NOAA; Mr. Zinser, the Department of Commerce's Inspector General; and Mr. Jones, the Director of NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement. Mr. Jones has been aware of these issues for some time. Many of us can recall visiting with Mr. Hogarth and with him in Washington, D.C. in 2006. We remember his promise to visit and consult with local fishermen, and we remember that he didn't do so, and that the next thing we heard, the auction was raided. The hearing is also an opportunity to carefully scrutinize what has been happening and to get a better understanding of the conduct of certain NOAA personnel. But this hearing is not solely intended to be a retrospective or to exercise blame. It's not what the committee is about, and it's not what this fishing community is about at all. The fishing community here wants to end any and all abuse of authority and mistreatment. They want meaningful action and real change in the NOAA's enforcement and legal operations. They want more reasonable, flexible, and transparent regulations and rules. The Inspector General noted clearly that this is not a situation where fishermen reject all regulation. More than anyone, they understand the need to preserve and conserve. So as the Inspector General said, the numerous individuals with whom they spoke supported regulation and enforcement, provided it is fair, equitable, and not onerous. That's why this hearing is an opportunity to learn about the immediate and long-term actions that Dr. Lubchenco proposed in response to the report. It's also an opportunity to hear from Mr. Zinser on whether such actions sufficiently address the problems identified in his report, and if not, what other reforms are necessary, as well as the Inspector General's report on what he will do for continuing scrutiny of past specific conduct of enforcement and reports of those particulars. From this hearing, my colleagues and I hope to learn what, if any, further congressional action is warranted to ensure that our fishing community is treated fairly and with the respect it deserves. I'm looking forward to the testimony of the witnesses, and again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much for joining us in Gloucester and having us here. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Tierney. Chair recognizes Congressman Frank.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you letting me sit as a member of this panel since I'm not a member of this committee, but I used to be. But I used to be a lot of them. And I want to say the work of my colleague, Mr. Tierney, in this particular action and in general has been congressional representation at its best. And I'm also pleased that we're here with state, local, and federal cooperation among elected officials. Too often you get fingerprinting, and having the mayor, having the state legislators, having the Congress here is an example of community coming together. There is a fundamental problem here. It's not just the specifics. It is an attitude that looks at fishing violations as if they were crimes. Yes, there are occasional crimes. There are every very small number of people who set out deliberately to violate the law. The great majority of people who are caught up in this net of enforcement are among the hardest working people in this country. They are doing a very important job for the economy. They are doing it in very difficult circumstances with a great deal of complexity. People who drive know that there are lines painted on the road. They're not painted in the ocean. People who haven't fished don't have a sense of the inherent uncertainty that is out there. And for people who have been treated as punitively as the fishermen have been treated is simply wrong. Now, one of the problems we are told is that there is an overload of criminal enforcement agents in the area and not enough elsewhere. Now, I don't want to put anybody out of work, so I have a solution here. Take some of these people who have been doing this tough law enforcement and send them to the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have under-enforced. Before control of the Congress switched, the lame duck Congress passed that and signed into law. We voted against it. In particular, I have never been a fan of magic numbers. And the notion that there absolutely has to be a rebuilding to a certain level in 10 years, rather than in some cases 11 or 12, makes no public policy sense. That is truly voodoo regulation, to take a particular number and over-fixate on it. I want to say a word to my environmentalist friends. The notion that the business of fishing has to be protected from fishermen is wrong. They are working environmentalists. I do not know many fishermen who hope to be the last people ever to fish. They are people who believe in fishing as an economic activity and as a culture. It's certainly very important to the area that I represent in southeastern Massachusetts, New Bedford, and elsewhere, as it is here. This isn't just the fishermen who care. It's the whole community because it's the economy and the culture. The notion that fishermen would put themselves out of business, put their children out of business, and the fishery is wrong. Yes, there need to be rules, and we have the most regulated activity, I believe, around. But there needs to be a recognition that the fishermen want to be the partners of the regulators. And I would add, from a law enforcement standpoint, there aren't enough law enforcement people in the world to impose on people who think it is unfair this kind of restriction. So if we do not get a better job of eliciting a belief on the part of the fishermen that this is fair and that this is reasonable and that it takes into account the complexities they face, then we will be chasing ourselves with punitive enforcement that in the end is less enforcement than we can get in a cooperative area. I appreciate the administrators being here. It is our job in the Congress to change the Magnuson Act, to put some flexibility in there, and we will be doing that. But we also have to have a recognition that we are talking here about putting rules in place that govern an industry that is full of people who are law-abiding, who want to cooperate, and the approach that has been taken, and I admire the work that Mr. Kennedy is getting it done. We now have irrefutable evidence that there has been excessive and inappropriate hardship. That's got to stop, and at the same time, we will be amending the law, and I would hope going forward, we will get the genuine cooperative approach to law enforcement that's in everybody's interest. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Congressman Frank. As Mr. Frank said, he is not a member of this committee, and without objection, his participation, questioning, and statements are
your bus, not for me to bring it down.
Anyone out there? I also want to say that in the interest of trying to facilitate a hearing so we can get the testimony from the witnesses, I would ask the members of the audience to try to keep the expressions of approval or disapproval to a minimum, and if you can, I'd appreciate that so we can just move forward here. I want to, there's no additional statement, so I'm going to start by introducing our witnesses. Mr. Todd Zinsser is the Inspector General of the Department of Commerce's Office of the Inspector General, where he is responsible for promoting economy and efficiency in the programs of the operations of the Department of Commerce. He has served as Inspector General since December 26, 2007, after 24 years as a career civil servant, beginning as an investigator for the U.S. Department of Labor in 1983. Dr. Jane Lutsenko is Undersecretary for Commerce for Oceans and an Atmosphere Administrator at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. She's the first woman and the first marine ecologist to head NOAA. Prior to being appointed as administrator, she was on the faculty of Oregon State University. She is a former president of the International Council for Science and was a presidential appointee for 2 terms on the National Science Board. And this is the board which advises the President and Congress and oversees the National Science Foundation. Mr. Dale Jones has directed since 1999 the Office for Law Enforcement of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Fishery Service. In this capacity, Chief Jones oversees 5 regional offices consisting of 100 special agents and 35 uniformed enforcement officers, as well as 31 technical and support staff.